YouTube, how's it going? The Goat House is back. Today, we're going through every NFL team, and I'm giving you a player they must cut heading into free agency. We have a recent video similar, but it's a player each team should sign. So check that out. We have a bunch of these types of videos on the channel. Definitely more to come. We'll have you covered for all of the offseason. Can't wait for our free agency grades that are coming out like crazy through free agency. Follow us on Twitter for live news, rumors, and updates. A lot going on right now. Teams hiring coaches, still assistant coaches. Link pinned in the comments for our Twitter, as well as our Discord that you can now join, and our sponsors, GLD Shop, Liquid IV, Walk the Mock, rocking the Dallas Cowboys chain from the GLD Shop. They have all NFL teams and more. Twitter subscribers get some bonus content as well. Links down below. So I have this page ready for everyone too. If you want to see more than just one cut or potential savings for teams, I tweeted this out. I also put a link in the comments. So it's got every team on here with potential cuts, projected cuts, potential trades, restructures for some teams that need the help, and then who they can use to do that and how much space they can clear. So it's a very useful page that I make every single year. It's free for everybody, so you just got to click the link down there. Pinned in the comments. First team, we'll start with the AFC East. The Jets, and the first team is interesting. Carl Lawson is who I went with, and I can actually debate with myself all day on this one. Because one side of it, you got a pretty good ball player here. You got a pretty good pass rusher that you signed a couple years ago. It was a big addition. He was actually hurt that first year, so I really only got going with him 1 year. So do you give him more of a shot? So that is why you don't cut him. Why you do cut him is that, the Jets are, around even in terms of cap space, around zero, I should say. And they definitely could clear some more space to help them out this offseason to get better. So this is a pretty good amount you could clear. You got to sit down and think, who's more valuable, Carl Lawson or the $15.4 million? We got young guys stepping up. Jermaine Johnson hopefully going to step up. So tough decision for the Jets. Just tough to let him go for sure, but some tough decisions to make because he can end up clearing a good amount of cap space. So went with Carl Lawson for the Jets here, clearing that 15.4. The Patriots went with Trent Brown, which is another one that's a little tricky because, once was a solid tackle and still could be if he's healthy. I think he gave up some pressure this year, obviously. But $10.91 million. Usually you'd rather have a quality tackle than clear the $10.91 million. Usually the quality tackle is a little more valuable. But in this case, struggled this past year. Also has the injury concern. Patriots aren't desperate for cap space, though. They're not desperate. But this could definitely help them try to retool the offensive line and add some other pieces. Thought about Hunter Henry, who's a solid piece for them. The tough decision on him. Jonnu Smith, they actually lose money if they cut him unless it's a post-June 1st cut, and you save just over $4 million. So is that worth it? Sit down and say, is that worth it? I don't know. I went Trent Brown. Could look to get some better tackles in there for in New England, and then they can clear that space and they can go crazy in the offseason, not just at the tackle position, because then they'll have a lot of space. Bills, we're with a little bit of a bold one here. They're starting center Mitch Morse, who's been pretty good for them. Not super great this year, but wasn't really the issue on the offensive line, which they do have issues on the offensive line. The Bills are in a little bit of a hole when it comes to the cap space. They didn't really have an obvious one, the Bills here. There's really no one that stands out like, yes, you got to cut that guy. But, the offensive line's already an issue, so maybe get that space that you need here with the 6.16 by cutting Mitch Morse. And, sometimes centers are pretty easy to find, even if cheap. The draft's pretty good in the middle rounds. Teams finding starters all the time through there, even the later rounds sometimes. They end up being a lot cheaper, so you can save money in a spot and get younger in that position as well. So I thought that made some sense. But it's a tough call because Mitch Morse has been an important piece of the Bills for a bit. Dolphins, Byron Jones, the cornerback who didn't play at all for them this year, is a solid corner, but overall has been underwhelming for the Miami Dolphins. You only cleared $3.54 million by cutting him unless we threw the post-June 1st cut in there. Teams are allowed 2 of these every offseason. So what that is, you actually can cut him before June 1st, but you don't get the savings until June 1st. So that's the tough part. It'd be 13.6. So, about a little bit over $10 million more in terms of savings for cutting Byron Jones, making him a post-June 1st cut. So, but that's tough because the Dolphins need the cap space. Do they want to wait around for that cap space? Or they, that's the tough part there. But he didn't play at all for them this year. New coach, new defense coordinator, I should say, coming in, which Jones, if healthy, could fit Fangio's defense for sure, But it's they probably are better off going a younger route and clearing that much-needed space there. So it's another tough call here because you had a pretty good corner. Not too many obvious options other than that for the Dolphins, and he's really not an obvious option. I can't sit here and say it's guaranteed to happen. Next, for Washington, easy one. This is one of those ones where this is going to happen. Carson Wentz, you cut him, the Commanders cut him, they free up $26.17 million. Done. It's going to happen. That's an obvious one. And that's a pretty good amount to clear. And the Commanders are in the positive. A lot of teams are negative right now. Cap space, they're positive. So that's a pretty good sign there. They're able to clear. I mean, that amount alone, 26.17, is more than half the league has in terms of cap space at this moment. So it's pretty good. What's not good is trading for Carson Wentz. That was not good. But just looking forward, past is behind us here. This looks pretty good. They'll clear a decent amount of cap space here. This is one that's just definitely going to happen. The Giants are going to go Kenny Golladay as well. He can clear $6.7 million. We're cutting him, this offseason. But this is a very decently strong candidate for a post-June 1st cut. They can actually cut him whenever, right now, and declare him a post-June 1st cut, which teams are allowed 2 of those per offseason. And that would clear $13.5 million. And why this is a strong candidate for it to happen, the negatives of doing the post-June 1st cut, again, is we talked about it, a few teams on the Dolphins, we talked about it. The negative is you don't actually get those savings until then. But the Giants have a good amount of cap space, one of the league's most, so they could afford to do this, to wait a little bit, cut him, let him go elsewhere, and get that cap space, unless, they spend big on Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. Depends on how they structure those contracts, and they want some more wiggle room right away. They cut him, they get that $6.7 million. So I would expect Golladay to be cut, though. That contract is, still doesn't look great. There'll be some dead cap on that, but overall they'll clear. The Cowboys, Zeke, $4.86 million. If they cut him, it's kind of been reported that they'll look for him to take a pay cut, which is possible. I think it's very realistic possibility that he actually accepts a small pay cut and he stays with the team. Definitely could see that. But they could cut him, clear that $4.86 million. The Cowboys definitely could use some cap space if they want to wait till June 1st, which is a possibility. They clear a little bit more of a reasonable, a good number there in the $10.9 million. So tough decision for Zeke, maybe to take the pay cut or not, or whether it's offered or how it's offered, and a tough decision for the Cowboys because it's just one of their key pieces of their franchise for how long. And, he's still very good. He's still a solid back, a very good short yardage back. So we'll see. The Eagles did not have an obvious one because this is the complete roster. They do a really good job building this roster. It's why they're in the Super Bowl. But Trey Sermon, who was kind of a little bit of a surprise cut before the year for the 49ers, the Eagles scooped him up, and we didn't really see any of him. For a guy like that's already kind of bouncing around teams perhaps, a practice squad type guy, that's a pretty good amount of money for a guy like that, $1.02 million. So I'd expect that to be one for the Eagles. Other than that, they'll probably restructure some contracts to clear some space, which they seem to do quite a bit. I'd look out for Darius Slay and Lane Johnson, which basically isn't a pay cut to be taking money and kind of pushing on their deal and kind of pushing it to the back end there, kind of almost borrowing money from the future in a way. So that's what I would look out for the Eagles. They didn't have any obvious cuts to save a lot of money. Ravens didn't have any obvious ones either. I went with Calais Campbell, which is actually a tough one. Because I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, they're definitely going to release Calais Campbell. They may very well keep him. Solid player, obviously likable over there in Baltimore, but 37 years old, still playing all right, but 37 years old, and you have the ability to clear $7 million by cutting him. They got some young defensive linemen. They know how to find new defensive linemen. I think, what's more valuable? A solid player who had an epic career that's 37 years old or $7 million. I'm almost leaning towards that $7 million, in my opinion. It's tough to say what they'll actually do with that one, but other than that, they do not have any obvious options, clear-cut options there. They do have a little bit of cap space. They got to deal with Lamar Jackson, and then they don't want him to stay on that tag because that full price of the tag will be the full cap hit this year, so they'll be out of cap space. They want to be able to extend him long-term, and you kind of can shift around, spread out those cap hits a little bit so you're not all hit in the first year. So, yeah, an interesting team this offseason, the Ravens, with Lamar Jackson and what they'll do here. The Browns, yeah, no obvious ones for the Browns either. They went with Joe Haeg, backup offensive lineman, can clear $2.5 million. So it seems to be a way that they can clear a little bit of space. They need to clear more, but Deshaun Watson, I can almost guarantee will be restructured. They'll push some of that cap space back, and they can clear a whopping number. It's like 30, it's something million. We talked about it on Twitter. It's on that page. There's a link pinned in the comments I put for it in the beginning of this video. I kind of showed it a little bit. Got some restructure numbers, including Deshaun Watson in there, if they were to do it, which I would expect it. So that would be their way, and they can get other guys done to on the roster for restructures and clear some more space. Steelers, William Jackson, who they actually traded for at the trade deadline. It was a very, very small trade, very no risk in that. Didn't end up playing for them. Obviously was injured. And, he could be a pretty good corner, and they were interested. They feel like he can fit Mike Tomlin's scheme. And, that could have been good because the Steelers could use a corner, and Cam Sutton's a free agent as well. They very well can get him back. But $12.17 million is just too much to mess around with here. If he actually played and looked pretty good, that was kind of the trial run. If he is worth that 12.17, we really don't know. So I don't think you really take many chances here. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money that the Steelers could use. They're not in the worst situation at all, in terms of cap this offseason. But they definitely can use that money there. So one I'm kind of expecting, unless he agrees, this is maybe a pay cut candidate. Will he agree to take a pay cut? I think that's actually a possibility because maybe he wanted to go somewhere where he fit. They traded for him, so they kind of viewed him as a fit. 12.17 is just too much here, being left out there unsaved. So possible pay cut maybe. Bengals went with Joe Mixon, very talented running back. They want to get this running game going a little bit more. It starts with the offensive line, so they could cut him. And maybe they bring back a guy like P. Ryan for cheaper, maybe draft a guy as well, and then throughout the rest of the offseason, free agency focus in the draft, focus on offensive line, making that offensive line better. And I think just by doing that, no matter who your running back is, the running game is going to be better. When you focus on bringing some other guys back, like a Jermaine Pratt, maybe they got a decision to make with Jesse Bates, perhaps, but you can free a good amount in 7.26 moving on from Joe Mixon. If they want to wait and make it a post-June 1st cut, you'd free just over $10 million, which the Bengals have a decent amount of cap space, so they could afford to do that, wait a little bit there. So that's a possibility. So interesting one, big-name running back that could be available here at some point this offseason. Lions is an easy one. Definitely expect this to happen. Michael Brockers, they saved $10 million, which the Lions have a decent amount of cap space, but they can have even more here with $10 million. It's a good amount. Just veteran interior defensive lineman. They want to improve their defensive lineman as it is, and they already have young guys. Maybe they sign the veteran guy, perhaps, which is a lot better than Brockers. That all makes sense to me. So this is definitely one I'm expecting to happen. $10 million saved for the Lions, and they can have a pretty good offseason finding that a better defensive tackle, finding a linebacker. Maybe they look at corner, whether it's inside or outside. We'll see. Bears don't have one that saves a lot of money, but that's okay because the Bears have a lot of money. They have a lot of cap space, by far the most in the league. Trevor Siemian, the quarterback, $1.965 million is what they would clear by moving on from him, which I'd expect them to. Go out and find a guy that kind of not only fits today's era, but fits more of that offense you switch to. We saw them play the Patriots. They adjusted things kind of almost the entire offense, and it kind of fit Fields a little bit better. So go find a guy that fits that a little better. A guy that's got some legs a little bit, behind Justin Fields, instead of Trevor Siemian. So move on from him. Let him go elsewhere there. Vikings, tough one. Eric Kendricks. It's hard for them to see. It's hard to see them cutting Eric Kendricks because he's one of the better linebackers in football for some time. This year, he definitely had a bad year. Scheme change, I think, affected him a little bit. He definitely could work in Brian Flores' scheme. That's why it's tough. I think he'll view him as a good linebacker, but the Vikings definitely need some cap space, and you can save $9.5 million, which I mean, if Kendricks plays like he does, just not this season, the year before, then he's worth that $9.5 million. But took a step down last year, didn't really fit that scheme. Question of will he fit Flores' scheme? I think better than Donatel's. That's the question there. But they need that cap space, so I think they can do that. They very well can cut both linebackers. I thought about putting Jordan Hicks up here because maybe he's more likely than Kendricks, but it's $5 million. I think you see more space here, and I do still think it's likely with Kendricks. And there's some other guys. Talk about Dalvin Cook as well, maybe Adam Thielen. So interesting offseason for the Vikings. They definitely have to clear space. Kendricks, they clear 9.5 if they move on from some tough decisions coming up here. Packers don't really have an obvious one. This morning they actually redid Aaron Jones' contract. It was kind of a half restructure, half pay cut, which is kind of rare. We discussed the exact numbers on Twitter. So he was kind of thought of as a surprise cut candidate maybe. So Aaron Jones will be back. Dean Lowry's one they can move on from, who's been a decent piece for them for some years. But they got some younger guys like Devontae Wyatt. They want him to kind of break out, step up. So you could save the $3 million, and the Packers could use some space. They'll clear a lot of space if they trade Aaron Rodgers, which seems like a possibility here. But no, super obvious big money cut candidates here for them. Colts got one. This is one that's going to happen. Very obvious, clear cut. It's going to happen. Matt Ryan, moving on from him, clears $17.2 million. Then he can try to go elsewhere. But the Colts probably going in some sort of retool stage, maybe rebuild. Go find the guy the young guy that fits Shane Steichen's offense. That makes sense to me. I like that hire a lot too. So moving on from Matt Ryan, $17.2 million, expecting that one. The Titans have a lot of obvious cuts. Taylor Lewan, which they move on from him, $14.84 million. And they have some other ones that definitely like Robert Woods and Zach Cunningham, perhaps, maybe Bud Dupree. But the Titans a little bit in a hole in terms of the cap space, but they have a lot of simple ways to clear. Just cuts, like obvious cuts. Those are simple ways of clearing space, like easy ways of clearing space. What's a little more complicating is cutting guys you don't want to have to cut. Or I know Luan's been a big, face of that franchise, but injured, not playing as well, so it's kind of an easier cut. But not so, cutting guys you don't want to cut or restructuring, kind of kicking the can down the road, things like that. So Titans have some simple ways to cut there. Jacksonville, Shaq Griffin is a simple one, easy one that I think will happen. Shaq Griffin, who's a solid corner, was injured this year. Before he got injured, I wasn't really sure if he was really fitting the new kind of defense, the coverages they were trying to run. It kind of felt like that, but it was kind of a small sample size, I should say. But a whopping $13.14 million. Would you rather have a decent corner in Shaq Griffin or the $13.14? I think you'd rather have that $13.14, especially since the Jags are in a little bit of a hole cap space wise, because the spending spree they went on last offseason, which kind of paid off for them, especially down the stretch of the season this year. Some good players they added there. Texans have a decent list of guys I expect them to move on from. None of them have crazy savings, but it kind of adds up. But Eric Murray kind of being one of the easier ones, simple ones here. Move on from him, clear that $4 million. There, a guy like Christian Kirksey can clear a little bit more, but that's a little bit more of a tougher decision because he's played decent for them. But they have a list of guys that they could move on from and clear some space there. So Eric Murray, defensive back, they can clear a little bit. Saints, they have a weird situation with Michael Thomas, the way they reworked that deal. Some guarantees kick it at some point, so they have to make a decision. But they actually don't free any space by cutting him unless it's post-June 1st for Michael Thomas. So weird situation with that one. But Jameis Winston is one that I'm expecting, which that contract doesn't look too great right now. Pre-June 1st, you only clear $4.4 million, and the Saints kind of need their space now too because they're in a little bit of a hole. But they'll continue restructuring deals. They've already got Marcus May done his deal and freed some space. But post-June 1st would be 12.8. That's a little more like it, but interesting decision, which I still think Winston could be good. They just didn't play him. They just didn't play him. He has the injury concern as well. You just kept thinking they're going to put him in, so apparently the staff doesn't like him, so I would expect them to move on from him already. Bucks, and a lot of people are talking about, a guy like Donovan Smith. I don't know. He's a decent left tackle. I know some people, rip Donovan Smith quite a bit, but he's got experience. He's played well in the past. I don't know if you just let go. I think you clear like 5 million, 9.5 million. Moving on, I almost rather have him. And there's some other interesting decisions here with the Bucks. They do want a free space. They almost might go in some sort of rebuild stage, but longtime veteran tight end here, Cameron Brate, can move on for him and clear 2.03 million. We'll probably see they might have some Bucks guys come up in trade discussions. We could, and then restructuring some contracts. That'd be the ways they kind of clear space for the most part here. Panthers going with Damian Wilson. You clear 3.58 million. They don't have a whole lot of cut candidates. What about Pat Elflein? They would need Bradley Bozeman back first, though. Elflein would clear a little over 4 million, so a little bit more than Wilson. But I would expect Wilson to be, I expect them to move on from him. They bring in Evero, who hasn't really valued linebackers, and they already have good linebackers there, so they're definitely not going to keep a long list of these pricey guys. They'll probably add some really cheap options after this. So I view 3.58 million as kind of pricey for a guy that's probably a depth linebacker. So they're likely to cut him. Another quarterback one that's definitely going to happen, Marcus Mariota. We kind of knew this was going to happen even before this year, unless he played out of his mind, just the way the contract was structured. I think we talked about it last year, videos on Twitter. But the Falcons move on from Marcus Mariota, and they'll clear 12 million. The Falcons are very high in cap space. They're second after the Chicago Bears, and they'll be able to clear even more right here, so they can go to work if they would like to. With 12 million from Mariota, definitely expecting that one. Broncos, Graham Glasgow, who, could play guard or center, so that's good. They had him fill in for them last year, obviously. It's good to have some experienced offensive lineman, but 11 million seems like a bit here. And the Broncos, they have around 9 million in cap space, so there's teams in far worse situations, but you'd like a little more cap space. So moving on from Glasgow and letting Sean Payton kind of choose his offensive lineman, you'll free that 11 million, find some cheaper guys perhaps. Do they want to get Reisner back? I thought that made sense to me. I think Ronald Darby's another legit cut candidate here for the Denver Broncos, but Glasgow they both make equally sense, actually, but I want Glasgow here with 11 million. The Raiders, Brandon Bolden, they don't really have an obvious one. They already cut Derek Carr, which I don't know if that was an obvious one until a certain point it was. At a certain point it was. But Brandon Bolden, who's played for McDaniels for a long time, so maybe he values him, but 2.22 million I think is a little more valuable than a backup running back / special teamer. Do they get Josh Jacobs back as well, which I don't know if they really have anything to do with each other, but just how much you're spending on that running back room in total. But they didn't really have any super obvious ones. To me, that should happen. 2.22 million. The Chargers, I want Khalil Mack. There's some talk about Keenan Allen, which he has a very large cap hit, and they just can't have that, possibly because they're desperate for some cap space. I think Mack makes a little more sense. You free a little bit more than Keenan Allen. It's a guy that played 17 games last year, which was a little bit of a surprise, you hate to say, because he's been missing games. He's had some injuries pop up in his recent past. So, he played every game, and he started off super hot. And overall, he played well for them. But is it a guy that's going to continue, he's not going to continue to get better? Is he going to stay fully healthy going forward? You have 18.4 million on the line here. I think it makes more sense to move on from. It's a good player to move on from, but I with the need in terms of cap space, to me it just makes sense. And there's been some talks about Keenan Allen, which would be a little pricey in terms of how much you save. It's a tough decision there, though. And then Gerald Everett, there's been some talk about that. You don't save a whole lot there, though. So we'll see. Max one to watch for the Chargers, a team to watch. The Chiefs, they didn't have an obvious one. Kendall Blanton, who was on the Rams for a bit, obviously tight end. You free 1.01 million. So that I think it'd probably happen. Frank Clark's an interesting situation because his cap hit is like 30 million. So almost put Frank Clark on here because I could see in them actually, we're going to cut you. Hey, we're going to re-sign you. You see that sometimes, or we're just going to redo your deal. We won't even cut you. So that's a strong possibility as well. Because it's 1 year left. It's like a 30 million cap hit. So we'll see what they do there. But I think if I put Frank Clark on this video, I think people would have lost their minds. So Kendall Blanton is one, and we saw all those bonuses and everything kick in for the Chiefs. So They have way less cap space than the last time we were kind of talking, which they'll take. They won the Super Bowl. They will take that. So, yeah, but good news. They can restructure some contracts, including Patrick Mahomes, which you can clear like a whopping 30+ million, 33. I have a page, link pinned in the comments. It's on our Twitter as well. I posted a link where it's all numbers like savings. If you cut this guy, trade this guy, restructure this guy, not every guy, but realistic ones there. So that'll be useful for a lot of people, but Chiefs fans as well. Cardinals, easy one. Robbie Anderson, $12 million. So that trade doesn't look that great, but it's a different staff in there now. And you just cut him. He didn't look too good. Maybe he's a little bit of an issue to have around, well, just based on what was going on the sideline of the Panthers. Maybe the Cardinals aren't thinking that way, but they move on from him. And the Cardinals have a decent amount of cap space, but move on from him. They clear a bit more. They might be heading in some sort of rebuild or retool stage as well. It kind of feels like, but they might need receivers then if they trade DeAndre Hopkins, which is some talk about that. And they cut Anderson. They're gonna be in need of some receivers for sure, but this one made a lot of sense to me. Seahawks, Al Woods, interior defensive lineman, who they use a bit, but getting up there in age, and you can clear $3.67 million here. I thought that made some sense, but the Seahawks have a decent amount of cap space. They're not going to be desperate to make any type of cuts, but cuts will happen there. 49ers don't have an obvious one at all. Oren Burks, who was a depth linebacker, who they very well could keep because of that. But they didn't have any obvious ones, and I could still see him moving on from him and clearing $1.681 million. They don't have any other obvious ones. There's a pretty complete roster that doesn't really have any bad contracts really or anything like that. So that one made some sense if you're looking for one. And the Rams, same situation. Rams just did not have one. I mean, we could sit here and talk about maybe Tyler Higbee because he dropped the ball a bit last year, but he was still very productive. He's going to be 30, 31 years old, and you only free like $3 million or so. I don't think it's worth it, but I thought about it. Jordan Fuller, who, 2 years ago looked really good, but just injured and playing less for them since. Could you move on from him and free like $2 million? It just doesn't seem really worth it. But the Rams do need cap space. I'd imagine they restructure some guys like Aaron Donald. If they keep Jalen Ramsey, possibly Leonard Floyd, guys like that. But Jared Pinkney is a depth tight end. They clear $940K by moving on from him. They just don't have any obvious ones, which, because they need to clear space. So you almost wish you had a guy like, we can cut this guy and it's okay. It frees a lot of space. They don't really have that, but people may discuss Higbee. So I did think he thought he dropped the ball a bit and had some costly, like crucial drops last year. But at the end of the year, he started getting going again, especially that Christmas game. I just think he's more valuable than freeing the $3 million or so, so that's my take there. So Rams, like I said, in this video, some teams just didn't really have one. It's a kind of a smaller savings. They might not even do it. Some teams, it's like they're probably going to do that. It's a decent amount of savings, or maybe it's not. And there's some teams, it's like, yes, they're going to do that. Saves a lot of money. They don't need that player at all. That's just how it goes. And there's always surprise cuts. Like there's always heading into free agency, before free agency, really, it's right around the corner what we're going to see these. But sometimes there's also like, wow, they cut that guy. So kind of exciting, kind of entertaining stuff there. But we have a video kind of like this for who teams should sign, like one player they should sign. You can check that out. We'll have more videos like this. We have some on the channel and definitely more to come. So we have you guys covered with everything NFL, especially on our Twitter where it's kind of live updates, and then here on the channel afterwards with more in-depth stuff in video format. So join us on our Twitter. Join us here on the channel. Like, subscribe to notifications on. You can join our Discord that is pinned in the comments, as well as some other very useful links that are down there pinned in the comments and description. But I always go to the comments there. That's going to do it. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Goodbye.